Swim in the blue grotto, silver on our skin. Find the key to freedom, happiness within.
Greetings, friends. If you've been watching these oral history videos, you may have heard Swami Krishna refer to a few of the members that have gone into what songs of Ananda music work for what emotions. Well, so far as I know, that would be me. And so in this video, I'm going to share some background of that work and what I've been doing with it and what I've learned from it and what it means for you, with a few other notes along the way about my history with Ananda music and just a few interactions I've had with Swami Kriyananda. Now, growing up, I really didn't have much of a musical background. Music really came into my life much more once I came to Ananda. I did a little bit of singing, listening to a little bit of classical music when I was younger until probably about 7th, 8th grade when I started, listening to pop and rock music, as a lot of teenagers do. And what's interesting there is that I never really got into, really following one band or another and really into this or that. I really cherry-picked most of the music that I enjoyed from, one song from here, a couple songs from there, because I think I intuitively felt that there was an uplifting quality to music that I was looking for, that I eventually found in Ananda music and came really close to in other places, but never quite found it in the way that Ananda music has brought it to me. Growing up, I was raised in a Lutheran household and went to church every week, and I have to say that the part I loved the most was the hymns and some of the sung liturgy that we had. Many of the hymns I remember to this day, but I remember also how so many of them started beautifully and then lost something by the end, where they often in the Lutheran tradition, the hymns would modulate through a minor key toward the end and really just kind of drag down and sort of drop. And a few exceptions there were, songs like How Great Thou Art and Amazing Grace, and a few others that were really lovely, but it was always something I was a little bit disappointed with. And again, that changed once I came to Ananda and really heard and found and experienced music that not only began with that inspiration, but was able to hold it all the way through the song and keep that inspiration rising within myself and within everyone else. Now, I first came to Ananda in 1995. My wife Iswari had started taking meditation classes at the Seattle Center, where we lived at the time, and she was finding great inspiration in it. She was raised in a secular household, so it was her first time really touching into anything outwardly and explicitly spiritual. And I saw how much inspiration she was gaining from it, and I was getting very interested. For probably a good 5 years before that time, from when I got out of college to then, I was really looking for the answers, looking for truth, looking for what it all meant in life. And I was doing that primarily through a lot of reading and finding little snippets of truth here and little snippets there, one piece at a time, and gathering all those and trying in a way to triangulate my way to the truth. And I was getting really close, and by the time the end of 1995 rolled around, I felt I was very, very close, but still a little bit distant. I was very disappointed that there was a book called Human Potential, The Search for That Something More. And that something more is what I wanted, but that book still didn't answer it. Now, right around that time, we came to the Ananda community in Seattle for the first time. That was my first exposure to Ananda, coming to that Christmas party at the community. And I do remember clearly turning onto the driveway of the community, and it just said home to me. That was the clear thought in my mind. This is home. And in fact, at the end of the driveway, there was an apartment on the second story that had some lights on inside, a very beautiful warm glow, and that apartment said home to me clearly as well. And in fact, we were living in that very apartment 7 months later. But so I encountered Ananda first at that Christmas party, really enjoyed the people. There was some chanting and a little music there that started to appeal to me as well. And then a couple of weeks later, Iswari and I came down to the New Year's retreat at the Expanding Light at Ananda Village over New Year's from 95 to 96. And I do remember being very struck by the music, the chanting, the way Sunday service unfolded. Everything just started opening up for me because God no longer had to be wrathful. That was a key thing I'd grown up with in the Lutheran Church, was that God was this wrathful judge. And then suddenly God was a father, a mother, a beloved, and a friend, somebody who you actually wanted to be intimate with. And the chanting reflected something the hymns never reflected, which is that intimacy and that closeness. And then the music as well, the different songs that we heard at Sunday service and within classes and so forth, also spoke to that intimacy and that closeness of divine realities that I was really looking for. And then I think what also really sealed it was opening the book Essence of Self-Realization, that is a collection of Yogananda's quotes that Kriyananda compiled, and finding that all of the stuff I had written down from other books and bits and pieces was right there in that volume. And then also the other 20% that I don't think I would ever have found looking in books that were written by people without self-realization. And so then I said, okay, this is really what I've been looking for. And I also was able to see Swami Kriyananda at that time. I didn't meet him then. It was a few weeks later in Seattle that I met him for the first time. But I just saw him across a room at the dome at Crystal Hermitage and realized that's what I wanted to be. He really embodied everything I could imagine for myself spiritually, creatively, energetically. And I just said in my heart, well, whatever it takes, if it means being a disciple of a dead Indian guru, as I thought of it at the time, or spending a month in a cave in the Himalaya like he did and doing all this other crazy stuff, then I just, well, sign me up. That's what I want. And here I am now, still to this day, 30 years later, just fully dedicated to what we have here. So again, the music was one of the primary things that drew me and has really been my primary relation to this path, I think, over all these years, that it's what I turn back to every time when I need a little extra jolt, a little extra spiritual upliftment, because it contains so much of that for me. So right away there in early 1996, when we got involved more with Ananda, I jumped into singing with a choir. We had a wedding between Mel and Carol Bartu that summer that we sang for. That was my first, I think, real kind of performance of multiple songs, and started singing at Sunday service with people, learned a lot of chanting and working with the harmonium. In fact, I will add that the harmonium is one thing that totally convinces me of reincarnation, because when I first sat down with it, I just knew how to play it. I knew how to pump it. I knew how to do the little fingering where you have to hold a key down and then change what finger you're using to hold the key down so the sound is continuous, which is not at all how you play an instrument like a piano, which I had been trying to play and could learn somewhat well, but my fingers were never really adept at the way you play a piano. They knew how to play the harmonium. It was just how I was built. And so I definitely have had to play that instrument in a previous lifetime. I had the opportunity later that year in 1996 to sing the oratorio for the first time. Others in this series have talked about that performance in Palo Alto, which was when Swami Kriyananda was actively writing all of the recitatives that we now enjoy, and even faxing some of them to the soloists the day of the performance. And in fact, for the rest of us, for the choir, we had one new song to learn, which was the choral version of Sing Out With Joy that we had only 3 weeks to work with before that performance. Now for myself, this was the very first time that I had sung the whole oratorio at all, so I had to learn all of the parts, the tenor parts specifically. And interestingly enough, Iswari and I had just taken Kriya Yoga initiation for the first time at the end of November. That was, I think, 3 weeks before the concert. And I went to Australia for a conference, speaking at a conference in Melbourne the day after, the very morning after that Kriya initiation. And then I was taking some time to drive up and down the coast of Australia just for a little vacation. And I had made myself a tape of the tenor parts for the oratorio, and that's what I listened to driving up and down the coast of Australia. So that's where I learned all of those parts. I also had the opportunity to go with the choir on the Italian tour we did of 6 cities in 2000. A wonderful time there. I have very fond memories of not only singing the oratorio in a lot of beautiful venues to a very receptive audience, but also making it something of a pilgrimage to go to many of the holy sites around Italy where we were singing. Another special experience there was, with the music and traveling, is that I had the opportunity to go to Egypt in 2008 with the Ananda College tour that was happening at the time. And Swami had written a suite of songs for Egypt from his, I think it's his 1981 trip that he took there. And then he wrote various melodies and various pieces for that reflected the vibration of the different places that he had visited. And I took those melodies, transcribed them or transposed them so that I could play them on an alto recorder. That's a wind instrument about this long that's very portable, and was able to take those melodies back to the places that had inspired them and play them there. It was very inspiring to do that. And even in the temple at Abydos called Dendera, I was able to play the whole suite as well as I could. It wasn't that virtuoso performance, you might say, but it was really inspiring to take those and feel just how perfectly the music matched the vibration of those places. I did have an opportunity later to share that experience with Swami, and I think he was quite delighted that the music had found its way back to the land that first inspired it. Iswari and I moved to Portland in 2004 to help out there when new leaders were taking over. And that's also where our son was then born in 2006. And for a time there, I was able to be the choir director in Portland. What's fun about that experience is that when I moved there were no male singers in the choir at all. They had sopranos and altos and one woman who could sing tenor, and then to fill in the bass parts, usually another woman sang it but an octave up. So I got to learn all the bass parts to many of the songs alongside the tenor parts. And then shortly thereafter, I became the choir director in Portland, which I did for several years, and learned also many of the alto parts because I wanted to know what people in the choir were singing. And I'll make that as a recommendation for you. If for most people singing in choirs, they usually learn just their part and maybe also know the soprano part because that's the melody. But very seldom do people take the time to listen to and even potentially learn one of the other parts that's not the one they would normally sing in a concert. And the reason I encourage that is because Swami went to a lot of trouble to make each of those parts melodic in themselves. He often joked that in writing a 4-part harmony like that, he would spend 80% of his time with the melody, 15% of the time with the bass line, which is the support for the rest of the parts, and then 4% on the tenor and 1% on the alto. So often he joked that the altos would end up getting kind of the leftover notes in the chord. But he still did his best to make that part beautiful, make the tenor part beautiful, make the bass part beautiful as well to match the beauty of the melody. And it's quite inspiring, again, to sing and learn and sing those different parts because they all have a beauty of their own, and they all have something special to offer that can deepen your experience with any given song. Iswari and I then moved to Ananda Village in 2011, where we currently reside, and have been I've been a little bit off and on with the music because we've been homeschooling our son, who is now a teenager and off to college later this year. So I have now more time to be involved in the music once again, which I very much look forward to. One special experience that I had along the way was back in 2004 when Swami Kriyananda was launching the Indian publication of the original 1946 autobiography of a yogi. And we had this large event in Old Delhi at a place called Siri Fort, and we needed singers, of course, to present the music. I was the only tenor available at the time, and Swami would sing bass along with Dharmadas, and then we had about 5 or 6 women to sing the soprano and alto parts. But I was really blessed to have the opportunity to rehearse with Swamiji for a little while. And 2 things really stuck out from that time that I spent with him. Number one is how open he always was to accepting correction in his own singing. Even though he was the composer of these songs, which really he said he received them rather than composing them, he didn't, as far as I know, ever say, well, I know better because I'm the composer and I can do these things. He didn't have that attitude with the music. He was very humble in knowing that he received this, and he wanted to make it come out exactly as he heard it. So if we heard him doing something that wasn't quite right rhythmically, or the pitch was off or something, he would accept that kind of correction. The other piece that I learned from him at that time was just how important it is to pronounce words clearly, not just to enunciate them, but to also get the vowel sounds clearly and distinctly and properly with many of the words that often, for Americans especially, we tend to just gloss over or say with more of an American accent, even though we don't even think of it as an accent. Some of the words, for example, was in Life is a Dream, there's the line, "It can guide us and help us." Americans often will sing, "It can guide us and help us," not can, but kin. So the proper way to say is, "It can guide us and help us," not "it can guide us." And if you hear it on a recording, it'll jump out to you and say, oh, you want to sing "It can guide us." Same way with "In many hands make a miracle." We will often say it miracle as opposed to miracle, and it properly is pronounced miracle. Another word in that song is pinnacle, not pinnacle, but pinnacle. And if you sing it that way, it comes out, especially with a choir, to be a much cleaner sound. And one thing that I hear most frequently with singers is verbs that end with ed, like blessed, descended, resurrected, confronted, lifted. All of those sorts of words, there's a tendency to do an id at the end of it, not an ed. So you might be tempted to sing blessed, descended, lifted, resurrected, confronted. But those words are blessed, descended, resurrected, confronted. And you want to drop the jaw down and make the eh sound with that vowel to make it come out very clearly. And it's a lot of that kind of thing, the attention to detail, the attention to our presence when we're singing, how we're projecting our energy. Swami often talked, and others have said it in this video series, of singing from the upper chakras, the heart center, the throat center, and the spiritual eye, and projecting energy from that sounding board, rather than letting energy sort of swim down in the lower centers, where a lot of pop music and rock music and basically most other music tends to resonate with the lower centers, because that's where people's realities typically are. But Ananda music is trying to invite people to a higher reality, and so by singing from those upper centers and using that as the sounding board, we get a much clearer transmission of the higher consciousness that this music contains. Now, what I've been really trying to work with more distinctly and clearly is how the music actually resonates within the different spinal centers through the progression of the song, and how that progression of the energy deep down, the inner effects of the music, really provide the inner message of the song, the consciousness and the vibration on a deeper level than, say, just the lyrics. And this applies also to instrumental music where we don't have lyrics to work with. Oftentimes people will look at a piece of music, one of the songs with lyrics, and ask, what do the lyrics mean? And then, but what do you do with an instrumental? And is that all the music has to say? What I found by going deeply into the inner effects that's happening in the spine as the music is progressing, there's a deeper message in there. There's a deeper meaning that then the lyrics often reflect, and can sometimes be very surprising and actually bring far more depth to these songs than really meets the eye on the surface. Now, to explain something of where this comes from, we actually need to go all the way back to Yogananda's 1938 edition, the first edition of his book Cosmic Chants, where he presented a lot of his chants as well as some other songs that aren't really repetitive chants in that way, and presenting those to the world. And in that book, he did something that, to my knowledge, is quite unique or something new for sacred music. He has a page in there called When to Use These Songs, on which he noted how these devotional chants that are generally intended to help one contact God, that they also have practical applications for emotional, psychological, and even material needs. Each of these cosmic chants, he wrote, if I can quote it here, has been composed to satisfy a special need of mind or life. The devotee's various moods and inner desires can be strengthened or changed by the repetition of one particular chant suitable for that purpose. So to give a few examples, he said that No Birth, No Death is for overcoming religious, racial, or social prejudice and for achieving non-attachment to all human ties. The song Thou Art My Life, to sweeten a sour disposition. The song My Soul is Marching On, he said, used to banish fear, failure, or discouragement. And Pole Star of My Life, he said, sing when experiencing failure in business or failure in trying to contact God. So you can see that he put those emotional and psychological and spiritual and even material needs together and said, these songs work on all these levels. There's something going on here that is deeper than just a bhajan like you sing in India, where basically the lyrics are "Yay God" most of the time, or Hare Hare Krishna is basically "Yay God," "Hooray God," "Victory to God" kind of thing. He said these songs have a much deeper purpose. And really, Yogananda's music we have to count as part of the whole of Ananda music, not just the pieces that Swami Kriyananda composed, but also the ones that Yogananda composed, because he really, I think, set in motion this idea that songs could have these other effects besides just being something that's nice to listen to or something that raises devotional sentiments. So now we want to fast forward to 1998, when Swami Kriyananda introduced an idea of music antidotes. He took a little book he'd written called Secrets of Emotional Healing and assigned a song to, I think at the time he did 2/3 of the sayings in that book, and then he finished the other third in 2004. But he took each of those sayings, like I don't remember one of them specifically, but it's like he said, the secret of overcoming anger is such and such. And then he assigned a song to it. And it was very interesting to me when I saw that list, and I'll provide a link in the video notes here where you can go find that list of songs and the assignments to those secrets, as well as the page from Yogananda's Cosmic Chants where he explains his songs. I looked at a lot of those and I wondered, what do these songs have to do with this particular emotion? Some of them sort of made sense to me, but other ones didn't make any sense at all. So, for example, the song Cherry Blossoms in Kyoto, he assigned as an antidote for greed. He assigned Go On Alone, or Truth Can Never Die, as an antidote for anger. And he also assigned that as an antidote for self-pity. And some of these really leave you scratching your head, and I didn't really know what to make of them and how to understand what they were doing. Now, in 2003, we had this fun meeting of a couple of days. We just, at Ananda Village, we just had this big gathering of a bunch of musicians, anybody that wanted to come, and we would just get together and sing and share things we'd been experimenting with or ways of singing and so forth. And this idea of the music antidotes came up. And somebody played Go On Alone or Truth Can Never Die. And I really had an aha moment with that one, where the strong, very affirmative guitar strumming and the way it's sung, go on alone, banish weakness, go on alone. It's a very strong, powerful song. And I very clearly felt the energy in my spine just collecting into the deep spine there as a pillar of strength within me. And I had that aha moment where I said, oh, now I understand why it works for anger. And it goes to that story in Autobiography of a Yogi where Yogananda has run off to the Himalaya to try to find God there. And in the book, it seems like he was gone maybe a week or two. Swami Kriyananda later ratted on him and said he was actually gone either 6 months or a year. He was gone a long time. But he comes back to Sri Yukteswar very crestfallen. and apologizes and saying, I'm sorry I left, sir. You must be very angry with me for having just run off like that. And Sri Yukteswar said, anger springs from thwarted desires. I don't desire anything of anyone, so how can their actions be contrary to my wishes? What he was expressing was that deep centeredness where he didn't need the world to satisfy him. And so he couldn't become angry in that consciousness of deep centeredness. And that's exactly what this song accomplishes, is by bringing that energy so much into your center that you don't need the world to behave in a certain way. It's a perfect antidote for the consciousness of anger. It doesn't treat anger on its own level. It actually gives you the opposite feeling, the opposite consciousness to where anger is. And I realized too that the reason that Kriyananda had noted these songs as antidotes and stated them in terms of the negative emotions was that when you're stuck in an emotion, when you're dealing or struggling with something, you know often or can identify to some degree what that emotion is, but what the solution is, you have no idea. Do you think that when you're angry that you need to become more centered in your spine? That doesn't usually occur to you. But by listening to a piece of this music that gives you that effect, that has that effect on your consciousness, it will carry you out of anger in a short period of time. And in that case, the song is maybe 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes long. And what an efficient way of dealing with those emotional struggles. And so from that experience, and then I think I also experienced Irish Lullaby at that time, which he assigned as an antidote for cynicism, and had another aha moment of why it made so much sense. I began to really work with each of the songs that he assigned to understand exactly why they worked for the emotions to which he assigned them. So Cherry Blossoms in Kyoto, for example, I realized was not just a song about cherry blossoms, but its whole vibration was deep contentment. And deep contentment is the opposite consciousness to greed. And as I went through the different songs, they started to make a lot of sense like that. Now, he did say, Swami Kriyananda, when he gave us this initial list, he did say along the way that every one of his songs, every piece of Ananda music, was an antidote for one or more negative emotions. And he also said that given these few assignments that he made, he said, I don't need to go through all these different pieces because you're sensitive enough to go through them, and you've lived these teachings for years, so you can feel what they're doing. Now, he didn't say that to me directly. He said that to a smaller group of people, but he gave that instruction basically to say, you all can work on this. And he, in fact, said at another place, he said, you can explore these thoughts too, how the music ties in with the chakras in a particular way. Now, I had begun to really feel with some of the other songs too that there was a definite progression of resonance with the spinal centers as a song went along. A really good example of this is the song Walk Like a Man, that in the first verse, it's a very individualistic, an affirmation of individual strength, and it resonates with the lumbar center. When the women come in and sing the second verse and break into a harmony, it resonates with the throat. When the four-part harmony begins with a line that goes, give life your heart, literally the energy is rising from the heart center into the cervical center at the throat, the center of expansion where you would give your love to all of life. And it goes on from there to pull the energy up to the spiritual eye, where we then sing the first verse again that was originally an affirmation of personal strength, but sing it now here from the spiritual eye, which is an affirmation of our strength joined with the divine. So that's a very clear upward progression through the spine. So as I started playing with these, I began really documenting what was happening in the spine at different points to a lot of detail, sometimes more, sometimes less. And these are literally the notebooks in which I've kept a lot of those notes over the all these years. And this was back in, again, 2003, 2004 that I started this. So it's been now 22 years that I've been working on this. Really feeling what those effects are in every piece, including the instrumentals, including the vocal pieces, including all the little obscure ones that we really hardly ever hear. But really understanding that every piece of this music has some kind of inner effect that is what its true message is, I think, on the level of consciousness and vibration, more so than the outer form of, what kind of music it is, what sort of style or genre it is, what the lyrics might be saying. Because oftentimes, like I said, the inner effects can be very surprising, and then you see how closely and how perfectly the lyrics match what's going on in the spine. Like I said, with that line, "Give life your heart," it's right there to transition from the throat, from the heart center, the energy rising to the throat center. So "Give life your heart" is literally there in the music. And I found that having this understanding and this awareness of the inner effects has really helped me get past the music just as music, as just notes and rhythm and lyrics, to something that is a communication of vibration and a communication of consciousness, and then trying to bring that into performances more. And I'll talk about that here in just a moment. I did want to mention a few interactions I had with Swami on this regard. The first one being, I think it was later in 2004 when I'd been working through all of his assignments and had begun then to make assignments of my own for songs he hadn't worked with yet. And I really just had a brief moment to propose a few ideas to him and get his feedback. I think the conversation was all of 15 seconds. And I said that I think "Who is Sylvia," for example, works for the quality of vanity. And I think I mentioned Mukunda, the instrumental from the Autobiography of a Yogi slideshow, for impatience, and Memories of That Isle, which is on the mystic harp, for attachment to tradition and the inability to adapt. And all he said back to me was, "Yes, that works." And nothing more. He didn't go into any detail. We didn't discuss this anymore. But really, what I took away from that brief exchange was a nod to say, "You're on the right track. Keep going. Keep it up. This is good." And that definitely spurred me to go a little further and keep working on it. And then in 2005, once I was really starting to identify all these movements of energy and the chakras and their clear correlation to the way the lyrics were being expressed, I did write him an email, fairly detailed, I think, to ask whether he was ever aware of these effects when he was composing the music. And oddly enough, I never heard back from him, at least not in kind, not in words through another email. Now, Swami was very, very good always about responding in some way to every letter and every question that people asked him. Not always did he write back, but he would pray for people. He would surround them with the right consciousness around things. So I really believe now that's what happened in this case, is that he had already encouraged me to keep moving forward. And I think seeing and reading my expression of how I was really able to articulate what was going on here, I don't think he could respond on that level, because as a composer, in his case, he was receiving many of these songs in meditation, or really listening to them with a great sense of inspiration. And in that space, you're not going to have the ability to articulate as an observer what's going on in the spine and other parts of that, what you might call the creative process. So I don't think he really could experience it that way. But I did find that, ever since that time, really ever since I started, I've had the energy to sustain this work now over more than 2 decades, and to literally go through every piece of not only Swami Kriyananda's music, but also Yogananda's public domain music from the 1938 Cosmic Chants. And I've included in that also the one piece of Ananda music that Swami had nothing to do with, and Master had nothing to do with, other than vibrationally and as our teachers, which is Mayatri's "Keep Calling Him," that she talked about in her oral history video as well. And it really wasn't just until midway in 2024, this was really 20 years or so after I'd started this process, that I finally made my way through all, I think it's a total of 380, 390 distinct pieces, to be able to say that these inner effects happen and they are present there with every single piece of Ananda music, including Swami's and Yogananda's, as well as Mayatri's one contribution. And what I'm working on very much now, and part of sharing it with you here is making all of these notes that I have, all of these commentaries, all these observations available to people to consume and really go deeper with the music. And I've assigned emotions, both the kind of negative or challenging emotions that songs would overcome, as well as their positive qualities, and have a, right at the time we're making this video, I have a prototype website where this is accessible to you. And if you want to have access to that now, go ahead and contact me. Maybe by the time this video is made available, we'll have a better app version of it or something like that that we can put out publicly. But that's a project in the works to make this all very accessible to you, because I think it has a lot of power. Now, I wanted to share a few things of what I've learned through the process of working with the music in this way that I think can be very helpful in your experience with the music, your performance of it, your just consumption of it and listening to it, because again, this music is far beyond something that's nice, just nice to listen to. I like to say that every piece of this music is a unique doorway to the divine. They are guided meditations unto themselves that take the very consciousness of certain qualities and certain aspects of God, you might say, and uplift energy to that awareness of those aspects and then focus you on them. So many of the songs lift energy in the spine and focus you at the spiritual eye. What is meditation but, as Yogananda said, concentration upon God or one of his attributes? And every one of these songs has a positive attribute of consciousness in some way. And so listening to them deeply, listening to them in the spine, letting them affect what's going on in your spine, just like other yoga practices do, will raise your consciousness and put you into a state of, some degree of divine communion. And I do really encourage you to use them in this way. Now, one of the key things I've learned from this music is that they not only express the teachings, you might say, of yoga and the teachings of Yogananda and what the teachings are, but they also express how Master taught. He didn't rely on things like jargon or speak just to a small group of people. When he was out in public, he made his teachings very, very relatable by bringing them first down to a level of reality where people understood and could relate to them. And then from there was able to spiritualize those experiences by lifting them up and showing them this is what your higher self sees in this activity that you're doing or sees in this thing that you're struggling with. And here are the solutions that the higher self can then propose, that rising energy in the spine will offer you when you take the time to do it. And that's really what made it very accessible to wide audiences. And so much of what Swami Kriyananda added to Ananda music as well does exactly this, where, like I said with Walk Like a Man, it resonates first with the lumbar center. Many people's consciousness sits right down there. A lot of songs resonate first with the heart, or somewhere there in the middle of the spine. That's where a lot of people just are most of the time. But then it doesn't leave the music there. It doesn't leave the vibration there like most popular music does, and it just resonates with one of the lower spinal centers or maybe the heart. Sometimes it gets a little higher, but often it just activates one of those centers but doesn't really do anything more with it. Well, Ananda music universally will take that energy and lift it into a higher place. And that's something that can very much not only change consciousness, but inform how you perform this music. Now, I mentioned before that Swami often encouraged us to sing from the upper chakras, and that's a very good general thing to do. What I've found is very effective as well is when I've been able to clearly feel the movement of energy in the spine through the course of a song, that when I'm performing it, I will more consciously put my energy in that center while I'm singing it. Now, I'm still projecting from the upper chakras generally, but as we do with a practice like Kriya Yoga, where we're concentrating at the spiritual eye, but moving energy all up and down the spine, one chakra at a time, you can keep the awareness in the upper centers there, but still put more energy, say, in the third chakra, the second chakra, even down to the first sometimes, and move it around and move it up and give it more magnetism that way. And I've really found that by doing this, you can help magnetize the audience's spines which helps make the energy rise in their spines, which helps bring them to a higher state of consciousness by again increasing that kind of magnetism. An experience I had of this some years back was singing the song The Hill That Was Tara, that's on the Mystic Harp, and Swami also sings it on Windows on the World, that outwardly is about an experience with these ruins of a place called Tara in Ireland where the ancient kings sat. And so it's kind of an outward story where the lyrics are concerned, but inwardly there's a definite rising of energy in the spine. And when I performed the song that day, I very consciously, again, placed my energy in those chakras as I was singing it to try to magnetize the spines of the audience. And I was delighted to hear afterwards several people came up to me and said, I never understood that song until now. And that's where I knew I really had something there, that yes, I was communicating a more intuitive awareness, a deeper sense of what was really going on in that piece. And it's very, very powerful to work with it that way. Working with the songs with the inner effects as a performer is also really good for helping us resist the temptation to kind of fiddle around with the music. Oftentimes, especially people who have formal musical training will sometimes or oftentimes even think that our music isn't sophisticated enough. It's not complicated enough. It doesn't challenge us with, interesting discordant chords and sevenths and ninths and sustained fifths and all these, intricate rhythms and things like that you hear a lot of in classical music. It can feel rather simplistic on that level. But by going into the spine and singing from that place and singing with the awareness of the movement of the inner effects, it really gives us a far deeper way to relate to the music, where we get, I think, into what much more closely to what Swami felt and experienced when he was writing it, and possibly even what Master was feeling when he was working with his music. That if you remember, I think it's on these videos that Swami said, if you want to know me, listen to my music. Well, that really says if you want to know Master's ray coming through Swami, listen to this music. And that also says, don't impose your own ideas and your own vibrations and your own details or complexities in your own consciousness on the music. Try to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the music to see what it has to offer in and of itself. And that really helps, again, us resist the fiddling of, I want to add a little ornamentation here, or maybe we want to change this or change that, or do something else with it to make it more jazzy or make it more appealing to people. It doesn't need that. There's a lot in here to harvest. And I really feel that we as performers don't have the right to even fiddle around or mess with the music until we've connected with it in this deep way, connected with as much as we can what Swami also felt while he was composing it, feeling it and listening to it in the spine. And for that reason, I do encourage you to really consider that the recordings that we've made over many years, especially those that Swami Kriyananda is singing or had directed in some way, are some of the best references for how this music should be sung. Much more so than the score and the printed music. Now, in classical music, people take the printed score as the gospel and as the place where you start, and then that's like where you begin, and then you can take creative liberties with it all you want. Well, our music isn't that way at all. It's not a showcase for personal talent. It's a communication of consciousness into the hearts and minds and the spines of our audiences. And so those recordings really, and also our tradition of how we sing these songs, we have many people have been doing this for decades. Those are much more important than the printed music itself. So that the printed music reminds us of the notes and the lyrics and where the rhythm generally is, but there are many nuances that notation just simply cannot capture. And in fact, if you've listened to Anaya's video, she talked about trying to accompany Swami, and that every time he sang a song, he would do it a little bit differently. That his rhythm would be a little different, or he would emphasize this or emphasize that, which made it very challenging to accompany him on the piano or on the guitar. But that's because he was feeling the music anew every time he sang it. And it was there deep inside him, and he said, what does it need in this moment to as an expression? I don't have to go back to the score as if that's the law. The law is the consciousness I'm communicating to the people that are with me right here, right now, or the people that will listen to this recording later on. And so he came from that point, that place of the music being deep within him, and then giving expression appropriately from that point. And he really did say also to people to make the music your own. Now, that doesn't mean that you, again, impose your little idiosyncrasies upon it, where you say, well, I like to hear it this way, or I like to hear it that way. It's not about personality in that. What he's really saying is, go deeply into it. Try to feel from your own inner sense of meaning. Feel it as closely as I felt it, as Swami felt it when he heard it and received the music. And from that point, then do the performance. And if that means there's a little rhythmic change or a little ornamentation here and there, so be it. But come from that place rather than coming from just the idea that I want to make this more interesting by adding these little bits of ornamentation and so forth. I will say with that too, that on the recordings that he gave us, every note, every little detail like that, every little trill, little ornamentations or things that you hear are purposeful. Just like every note he said is sincere, every note he said he held up to the inspiration, meaning again that it's meaningful and purposeful. You may have encountered him if you were ever in a group singing the Go With Love song, where the ending is, may we be one in that light someday. Many people would get a little sloppy and sing, may we be one, and lift the note on B. And he would stop us and correct us and say, no, it's may we be one, so that you have a more emphatic jump to the oneness that's being expressed in the song. Well, I can also say that when you feel the effects of the music in the spine, that note makes a huge difference, because the may we be is resonating here in the cervical center, and the note on one jumps to the spiritual eye. Now, if you lift that one note on B, where does it have to end up? It has to end up in the medulla, which is the seat of the ego, which is going to potentially block that sense and that desire for oneness, you see? So that singing, may we be one, we might lose that connection to the spiritual eye and lose that connection to the sense of oneness that we're seeking. And so keeping it, may we be, all on the cervical center, then jumping to the spiritual eye, is much more effective for the inner experience, the inner consciousness, and the vibration of the song. And there are many other places where you'll hear, like at the end of John Anderson, My Joe, which is a very moving piece that can be very sad, but and the first time through on the first verse feels somewhat sad, but the second verse has two notes right at the very end that are different. And if you feel the effects of those, you feel those two notes, those two little changes are what transforms the song from being sad to being a victory, a celebration of a life lived victoriously. And so these notes are not, nothing is a throwaway. None of the syllables in the lyrics are throwaway. None of the notes are just in passing or something you can play around with. And in fact, even the introductions, the intros and the outros to music is very important. So it's often very easy for us when we're singing in a choir, for example, that there's a guitar introduction coming and maybe a soloist is singing, or maybe we're just singing some oohs and we don't actually get to sing words until later in the song. A really good example of this is the song Invocation. Now, the guitarist will actually play the entire song through once on the guitar. And then everybody begins to ooh. And then when the third time through, so we just do the whole song through with oohs. And then the third time through, the soprano begins singing. And then the altos join in. And then only in the latter half of the verse do the men actually get to sing. So as a male singer myself, I've often ended up sort of sitting there, and you're kind of waiting for that part to come in, your real part of the song, the piece that you think is most meaningful. But in fact, what's going on is that everything from the moment the song begins to the very closing of the song when silence comes back, every piece of that is meaningful all along the way. And as performers, we want to be fully present with all parts of that song, because they are opportunities, again, to feel what's resonating in the spine and to help the audience feel also what's resonating in their spine, so they get the effect of the uplifted consciousness. So even short introductions like the little organ preludes to the recitatives and the oratorio, the organ part before Christ is risen is just fantastic as an introduction, and not something that we want to throw away. So really, again, I encourage everyone to stay focused with the song from very beginning to very end. And this even goes if you're listening to a piece. Don't wait for the lyrics to start. Sometimes at the beginning of like some of the mystic harp recordings, there's just a few seconds of a deep note on strings, which is an Om vibration, and it's setting the stage for what comes later. And if you really feel it, you'll say, oh, I see there's Om happening here. And then we're building on that vibration and even potentially coming back to it later on. It's quite astounding when you take the time to listen to these details, that there's so much going on in there that we should never take for granted. And again, like I said, as a performer, go deeply into that as much as you can. And I think you'll more and more appreciate what's there to harvest in this music. And then it doesn't need us to add anything to it. It needs us to be very present with it and to channel as much of that vibration of the rays of the masters coming through Yogananda, through Swamiji, through this music, through us as performers, to touch the lives and uplift the hearts and minds of our audiences. Now, I want to make just a few quick notes about chanting in this regard, because I've also listened to many of the chants with their inner effects and try to feel what's going on with them. And what's true about most chants is that they are very cyclical and repetitive, unlike songs that have a definite progression, that you can really feel the movement of energy up the spine from a starting to an ending point. The chants are much more cyclical, and they tend to kind of do more of a rotation up and down in the spine, very much like you would do practice Kriya Yoga. It's moving energy up and down the spine and in a way loosening karma, loosening the vrittis that are in the spine to allow them to release. A really good example of this is the chant God of Beauty, that we don't hear very much, but in fact, Yogananda included it in the 1938 Cosmic Chants, and it will be in an upcoming chant book revision that's being made as I speak. That it only has a few notes. If you're not familiar with it, it goes, God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart. And it basically just goes from the heart center up to the throat, down, dips down just a little bit and lifts the heart back up, and just kind of does this massaging of those central chakras, back and forth, up and down. And that's really all it does. And this is where the 5-part chanting technique that Yogananda outlines in Scientific Healing Affirmations becomes really, really helpful where the energy in the spine is concerned. If you're not familiar with that technique, he says to, and it's the same technique he recommends for doing affirmations, which is to start loudly and sing loudly, and then lower your voice to a speaking level and sing the chant there, do the affirmation there, then do it in a whisper to bring it down, and then do it silent in the subconsciousness. And he said specifically to focus at the medulla oblongata while you're doing that. So loud to speaking voice to whisper to silent subconscious, and then bring the energy to the spiritual eye and do it there in silent superconsciousness. So there's 5 stages of doing the affirmations and doing the chants. And if you'll remember, Swami Sri Yukteswar referred to Master's chants as chant affirmations. So that's why there's a connection there. I really found that if you use that technique with any of these cyclical chants, you get a very clear progression up the spine, especially through the medulla with whisper chanting and the spiritual eye with silent superconscious chanting. And in fact, working with When you sing loudly at first, that very much resonates with the devotion of the heart, awakening, as Master said, whip up the feelings in the heart and get it moving, get some energy there that you can do something with. And then as you go more and more quiet, the energy will naturally lift up to the cervical center and into the medulla, and then you sing it whispering there to inject that thought into the subconsciousness, and then you bring it up to superconscious in the silent chanting at the spiritual eye. If you listen to various chant recordings and you're feeling the energy in this way, you'll see that when the chanters go a little more quietly, you'll feel oftentimes the energy just sort of pop up into the throat or into the medulla or up to the spiritual eye. And I've also found this very true with different styles of chanting. If you pick up my harmonium handbook, which has some details about different chanting styles and playing the harmonium, I also have a video on how to play the harmonium that I made from the book that we'll provide a link to in this video as well, that demonstrates different ways to play with like using chords, using a drone that you hear most commonly, and then also just playing the single note melody, as you may have heard Swami Kriyananda do. He wouldn't do chords, and he didn't very seldom used a drone. He would just play the melody by itself and let it be at that. What I discovered some years back in experimenting with these different playing styles in a chant is that an over-reliance on chords keeps the energy down at the heart level. It doesn't really allow it to go upwards in the spine further than that. And that's why I think Swami Kriyananda really discouraged us from too much reliance on chords. At the beginning of a chant, great. At the beginning of a kirtan, great. But don't leave it there. Now, a lot of people play with drones, and that's a nice way to get a little more fullness of the sound. But something I observe there is that whenever you're playing a drone, you are making chords with the melody because you have two notes, and chords are the relationship between simultaneous notes. And sometimes those chords are not the prettiest. A good example is in the chant Thousands of Suns, when you go, "From thy body do shine," that note is on a G, and the drone that's used is an A. An A plus a G makes a seventh chord. It's a discordant chord, and we hold that note for some time. And if you really listen to a chant played that way, you'll hear there's something that's it's discordant. Doesn't feel quite right. And what I discovered with those kinds of notes and with too much drone is that it kept the energy more centered in the medulla. So chords keep it in the heart, the drones can end up keeping it in the medulla, whereas the single note melody style definitely lets the energy rise to the spiritual eye. And that's, I believe, why Swami Kriyananda really focused on that style, is to keep the energy and the aspirations of the chant focused as much as possible at the spiritual eye. So in closing now, I just wanted to share a few thoughts of how would I define Ananda music. What is Ananda music with all the things that I've learned from feeling with it inwardly? What can I discern from that? And really the bottom line is that it is a vibration of feeling or feeling. It's a feeling of connection to your higher self. Again, every piece of this music, as Swami said, comes from rising energy in the spine and therefore evokes or induces rising energy in the spine, which in turn magnetizes a higher state of consciousness. And that magnetizes a connection to your higher self. So Ananda music in generally is that vibration or feeling of connection to your higher self. And again, every piece of Ananda music does exactly this. Like I said, I've gone through all of it, literally, and without exception, the music does this kind of upliftment of energy in the spine. It really is the only body of music that I know that does this universally. In all my experience with music, I've applied this method of listening to many other songs and other composers, other popular artists, even some old rock songs that I knew. And sometimes the composers get lucky and they manage to make a song that actually uplifts energy in the spine. How conscious they were of that, I doubt that they really were. Most of the time, the songs just hit one chakra and stay there. And that, I think, is why many pieces just fade out, because the composer really didn't know what to do with that energy once it was awakened. But Ananda music is unique in that universally it uplifts the energy in the spine. And I honestly think that that is a criteria that in the future we will use to evaluate what spiritual music is about. It's not just about the words. It's not like a lot of Christian rock music does, that you take some words about Jesus and overlay them on music that's basically resonating with the first, second, and third chakra most of the time. A lot of what's called worship music in contemporary Christian churches is just pop and rock music that's got a veneer of Jesus lyrics on top of it, but it really doesn't uplift the spine. It might awaken some energy. It might awaken a little devotion in the heart, but it's not going to uplift you and really change your consciousness. So I think that Ananda music will provide a criterion going forward of what it means for music to be uplifting, what it means to be spiritual. Now, I do want to clarify that I very much like to use the word Ananda music and not Swami's music because, like I said, Ananda music includes all of Yogananda's compositions as well. And there's a fair number of pieces that Swami Kriyananda had a hand in, but he didn't write wholly. So you take his songs of Shakespeare, for example. He didn't write the lyrics for those. He borrowed them from Shakespeare. He wrote melodies, but those are Shakespeare's lyrics. He wrote melodies for various passages out of the Bible, as we hear in the oratorio. He wrote some chants using traditional words like Om Kali, Om Namo Narayana, and so forth. John Anderson, My Joe, is a poem by Robert Burns. He wrote music for the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Those are not his words either. And then if you go the other direction, there are some songs in Ananda music that he did not write the melody for. Keep Calling Him, as I mentioned, is one example where he didn't write either the lyrics or the melody. Those were both Maitre's. The song O Master is a melody written by Mukti Lamar many years ago. Swami did some editing on the lyrics, but that was as much as he did with it. The song The Divine Mother is a melody by George Bizet, and Swami wrote new lyrics for it. He always loved the melody, and he wrote some more uplifting lyrics, as he did with the song All Through the Night, which is a traditional Welsh melody. And another song called Through a Long and Lonely Night was originally written by Alfred Newman. It was in a movie in the 1940s, and Swami wrote some new lyrics for that as well. And then even on some of the recordings like Life is a Quest for Joy, some of the tracks on that are Swami's original melody, which is called Different Worlds, but are improvisations that David Miller did in the studio at the time of recording. So there's a lot of our music that isn't wholly Swami Kriyananda. Really about 10% of the total is not wholly Swami Kriyananda. So it is a misnomer to call it Kriyananda's music or Swami's music. And in fact, he didn't want it to be referred to that, which is why we tend to use the name Ananda music. And then to finish up here, I said what Ananda music is a vibration or a feeling of connection to your higher self. It comes from rising energy in the spine and induces that. It also expresses Ananda's teachings in some way. Like I said, it expresses both what the teachings are and also how Master taught. And I like to say it is Kriya Yoga expressed in music, very much so. In fact, these songs have some of the most potent and distilled teachings that you'll find anywhere in all of our writings and lectures and so forth. The songs really have some of Swami's most profound and potent statements on particular subjects. But that's another subject in a whole to talk about, which is part of why I'm working on sharing all of my commentaries with people more broadly. And then more distinctly, Ananda music is also, it represents Ananda's vibration more clearly than anything else. Swami said that the books and lectures are great, but the music is Ananda's coursing blood. That is really what makes us who we are. And so if you want to know Ananda, listen to this music. If you want to know, again, Yogananda's ray through the filter of Swami Kriyananda to all of us, that's what Ananda music really contains. And that vibration, you might say, is one of simplicity. It's one of self-control. It's one of cooperation. It's devotion to God. And again, that connection to your higher self, which is always impersonal. It's always like the higher self in this music is looking down on some part of our lower human experience and giving us a reflection of what our own higher self would think of that. As he often said, as Swami often said of Yogananda when he was standing with another person, he was like a flawless mirror. I think that's also what disciple Kamala said. He was a flawless mirror to the person he was working with, always showing you exactly what your higher self thought of whatever was going through your mind and your heart and your emotions. And the music does exactly this. And because it's impersonal in that way, it's not the result of an ego expressing itself, an ego expressing how it felt about something. It's instead what the higher self sees in experiences like that. And so it makes the music something that anybody can sing and feel close to as if they wrote the song themselves. Not that it was Swami Kriyananda's expression. In fact, he clearly said that none of his music had anything to do with what he was experiencing at the time. And in some of his most challenging periods of life, he wrote some of the most uplifting and beautiful music that, if you put the two side by side, it wouldn't make any sense in the traditional artistic way where artists are just taking out their emotions on their music and on their art. It was never like that. He always depersonalized his experiences and universalized them. And that's what ended up in the music, is this impersonal higher self looking at a universal human experience and giving us something to connect to. So as you listen to the music, as you perform it, try to retain the connection to that feeling of your higher self vibrating within you, observing all of life, giving you those solutions, and giving you the upliftment that you can share with others.